My name is Harold Davis, and I serve as county agent in Pike County in southwest Arkansas. And welcome to the gardening series. And part one is on soil nutrition. So we'll start out by talking about soils this morning. So soils are made of three different separates: sand, silt, and clay. Sand is the largest, then silt, then clay is the smallest. And that's very important for us to remember as we go through because they all play a different role, and a good mixture of those three is really what we want. We will probably never find our soils as a complete sand, a complete silt, or a complete clay. Those three are typically always present whenever we talk about soils. One thing that we need to kind of understand is the difference between soil structure and soil texture. So soil structure refers to the arrangement of the soil separates into its units called soil aggregates. And an aggregate possesses solids and pore space. So structure is how it all kind of comes together, whereas texture is relative to the proportions of sand, silt, and clay. So like I said, we're never going to have 100% clay or sand or silt. It's always going to be a mixture. And so soil texture refers to how much percentage of each one of those three separates is available in our soils. Another important concept that we have to kind of go over is cation exchange capacity. Sounds really difficult, but it's really not when it comes down to it. So when we talk about cation exchange capacity, basically we're talking about the capacity of a soil to hold cations or the susceptibility to leaching. So you'll notice that all of those cations that are listed there are positives. And clay soils and organic matter are negatives. And we know from way back in elementary science class that opposites attract. So we really want some of that clay to be in our soils because it holds a negative charge and it's going to attract to these nutrients. The larger the CE value, the greater the capacity to hold the nutrients. So we need to remember that too. When you get a soil sample back, look at your CEC, and that tells you how much capacity your soil has to hold nutrients. And it may also influence other things such as residual herbicide rates. So we can kind of see here on, if you'll look over at the loamy sand, sandy loam, silt loam, clay, organic matter, and you see the CEC. And so from sand down to organic matter, you start to see an increase in CEC, or the holding capacity of our soils, okay? So that's very important that we understand that. And so typically when you get a soil report back, the CEC is also an indicator of what your soil texture is, how much sand, silt, and clay. If it's a very sandy soil, it'll have a low CEC. If it is a clay soil, it'll have a high CEC. So just to kind of summarize, the CEC is a stable long-term soil property determined by clay type and the amount of clay and organic matter that's within our soil sample. And it indicates the ability of the soil to hold to the nutrients, okay? And then we have a base saturation, that is the percent of CEC sites occupied by a basic cation. Remember, those cations are positives, okay? And it's also associated with our soil pH. So pH is one of those things that I also highlight anytime I get a soil sample, because pH is really important, and we'll talk about that as we go through. But basically pH is potential hydrogen, and you've got the scale over on the right hand side from a 5 all the way to the bottom of about an 8.3. So we see kind of where we're at. Here in Pike County, I get a lot of soils that are on the strongly acidic side, even lower than a 5.0. There are places that we have that have had pine trees on them and such for so long they haven't been limed. The needles have been there, and that adds to the acidity of the soil. So something we really have to think about here is probably, is it too acidic? In other parts west of us, they might be worried about being alkaline, but typically too acid is our problem. So you'll see the chart that's on the right many times in extension presentations, and it's a really good chart that talks about availability of a nutrient in relation to soil pH. And so if you'll look, between 5 and 7 is where most of our pHs occur, that our soil nutrients are pretty available in there. Probably the most available, if we were to lump all the nutrients in together, is probably between a 6 and a 7. That's slightly over a 7 is still available pretty good. But then we have some other problems going on. So a 6 to a 7 is kind of where we would really like to be, depending on the crop that we're growing. And you see on the left-hand side that as pH increases, availability of some nutrients decreases. So realize that too. And that phosphorus availability, is something that we also have to think about. Here in Southwest Arkansas, we don't have a lot of crops. So think about that. But phosphorus has, as we go on to the nutrient part of this, we'll see its purpose, and it can really affect things, especially photosynthesis and respiration. This is just kind of a chart to show you that at certain times of the year, your pH is probably going to change a little. So we start out in this graph at February the 27th, and we go all the way to January the 28th, and we see that during the winter to early spring, it's a little bit lower than normal. And then in the fall, from September to April, we have things higher. July, things start to go back down again. So we do have some fluctuations, but not a lot. The high was a 5.7 and the low was a 5.1. Really not enough to be concerned about, but do know that it does change. And if you give me a sample that is out of season from when you plan on using it, there could be some changes. So pH fluctuates during the year, usually highest in the winter, usually the lowest in the summer. Below average pH usually seen in dry winters. And sandy soils may show larger pH fluctuations, and we'll talk about this as we go along a lot more, but sandy soils, a sand particle is positive, and it is by itself infertile. So sandy soils don't attach themselves to nutrients as well, and it also changes pH because of leaching and such. pH alone is not a good indicator of liming our fields, even though that's probably what we look at a lot of times and just say, well, it's a 4.7, put this much on there. But the CEC also has something to do with that. And also the salinity level of your soils can affect your pH. And think about the irrigation sources that you use. If you're using well water, it would be a good idea to check the pH of that well water. If you're using water from an open source, a pond or a creek, again, we need to think about what is a pH that we're actually watering. If we're watering with acidic water for several years, it's going to change the pH. And here we just kind of go over a little bit that, as we see here, that there's a pH the same, but the recommendation of lime is very different. So we have a low CEC or a sandy soil over here, and we have a high CEC or a clay soil over on the right-hand side. And therefore, there are some changes. So, you may bring me a soil sample, and one might be a low CEC, but the pHs are so similar, but the lime requirements are different, and want to know why. And there is why, because the CECs are so much different between these two of an 8 and a 24. Okay, so there is our soils basics. Again, it's just very basic soils. If you would like to bring soil samples to our office, we'd love to process those and be able to help you out there and interpret it and tell you what you need to add to your garden. Okay, we're going to go ahead and add on the next PowerPoint 2, which is our plants. So this PowerPoint's a little more lengthy, but we'll try to go through it. And I like to give credit where credit is due, and this is a PowerPoint that was given to us as a county agent training, and so we appreciate the university sharing their materials for us. So we start out by talking about the law of the minimum. So we see this open barrel, and the law of the minimum applies to a lot of different things, but basically it's this. Your weakest link is going to determine a lot of things. So here we see that water is the weakest link, but whatever it is, if it's a nutrient deficiency, what have you, all of these things work together for the plant. And if something's missing, then that process isn't going to happen. The plant needs it for a specific purpose, and if it's missing, that purpose isn't going to happen. So which nutrients can limit a crop? And we need a balance of our nutrients, not too much or too small of anything. Not enough, a deficiency, and we get yield loss. Too much, we can have toxicity, lodging, yield loss, a possible deficiency of other nutrients because of competition. So a balance is an important thing. And when you get your soil results back, all of these, especially macronutrients, are over on the side, and you will see what you really need. There's 16 nutrients that plants must have, and each one of these is a chemical element, and each one is found on a periodic table. Plants do not require organic matter, enzymes, or hormones as nutrients taken up from the soil. So all of those things can be made by the plant. So for example, that's why we can do hydroponics, because the nutrients are there, but the organic matter, the soil media, is not necessarily a requirement, just that the nutrients being available are a requirement. So what is an essential nutrient? An essential nutrient is something that the plant must have, and it must satisfy these 3 criteria. The plants cannot complete their life cycle without the element. No other element can substitute for the element, and it is required by all plants for metabolic processes. So therefore, it is an essential nutrient. And if it doesn't meet this criteria, then it's not essential. But there are some things that are beneficial, okay? So you have a list of beneficial nutrients that we'll talk about, and these are probably all considered macronutrients. So macronutrients are needed in larger quantities. Macronutrients still needed, still essential, just in smaller quantities. So we see the difference between the two on here. And so macronutrients are what we typically think about when we talk about plant nutrients. But just because macros aren't needed as much doesn't mean that they're not still needed. And one thing I want to kind of point out about this one, it can be a little bit confusing, is the mobility, okay? And you can kind of come back to this and see which are mobile or immobile, but that's an important process. It's a thing that we're going to talk about later on. So soil mobility can influence how nutrients are taken up by the plant or the nutrient. So the plant extracts the nutrients from the soil, and that is typically because water attracts to those nutrients, and then the water is taken up through the plant. And then plants cannot move, so they rely upon the nutrients moving for them. And we also have potential loss mechanisms of nutrients, such as leaching, that our nutrients can leave the soil because they've leached out of the soil. And mobility is influenced a lot by the ionic charge of the nutrients. So again, opposites attract. And so any of those negative anions are usually mobile because they're repelled by our negatively charged soils, okay? So we say the clay soils are negatively charged, so anions are not attracted, they're repelled. But however, those cations are attracted, and depending on the attraction or the availability of open spots on that clay soil particle, they may just not want to leave. So we kind of think about that too, is that they may be there, but they may not be available because they're immobile. Again, opposite attract, and the same repel. So we can kind of see here where we have positive nutrients and we have negative nutrients, and so these nutrients are going to repel. These nutrients are going to attach to a soil colloid. Mobile nutrients can easily be translocated from older or lower to upper, newer tissue. And if they're not, then we start to see the deficiency down low, where immobile, we see the deficiency up high because they're not going to the rest of the plant. Don't rely upon deficiency symptoms alone. Consider other things. It's a systematic problem, and it's going to take the whole system. So we'll talk about specific nutrients and what they do. So nitrogen can be available in a couple of different forms, and that determines whether it's mobile or immobile. And we can lose nutrients, we can lose nitrogen, especially through different pathways. And it must be converted before it can be used by the plant. So just because we put nitrogen out doesn't mean that it's necessarily available. It must be converted. So nitrogen is mobile in the plant. And so that means that we'll see the deficiency symptoms on the older plants first, because it will move to the top of the plant. Major functions are chlorophyll, amino acids, and then energy transfer. And so some of the symptoms we see is chlorosis or yellowing, or stunted growth, less vegetative growth. So nitrogen is responsible for vegetative growth. We always need to remember that, okay? shoots, roots, and fruits. So here's a picture of nitrogen deficiency. You notice the striping and where it occurs. It's in the midrib first. A comparison of no nitrogen added with nitrogen added, and obviously the shoot growth is much greater here and a lot darker green. Phosphorus is available in several different forms also. It is immobile in the soil. It binds readily with other elements, and it is mobile in the plant. So immobile in the soil, mobile in the plant. So immobile in the soil should key us in that it may be available, but it's not usable. Okay, it may be in the soil, but it might not be able to be absorbed by the plant. Therefore, we're going to have to add some more. Major functions: energy transfer, photosynthesis, and respiration. It is a component of DNA, RNA, and nuclear materials of cells. And some of those general deficiency symptoms is the purpling of leaves and sometimes darker green. And we see on this one that great picture of the purple leaves. Okay, again, that is phosphorus deficiency. See it here in tomatoes. Potassium is available only in one form. It is immobile in the soil and mobile in the plant. Its functions are osmotic regulation in the cells or water regulation in the cells. It activates the enzymes, and again, plants don't need you to add enzymes. They make it themselves, but potassium helps to activate those enzymes. And meristematic tissue, which is where the plant grows. Deficiency is a red color or necrosis, a brown margin, and stunted growth, disease, decreased disease and drought tolerance. So we see here some brown edges on these plants, some yellowing going on too. But you notice the yellowing is not in the midrib, the yellowing is on the outer edges, and it will eventually work its way to the middle. Again, opposite of nitrogen, which was midrib, potassium is on the outside. Sulfur is mobile in the soil and immobile in the plant. Its major functions include amino acids, coenzymes, enzymes, and protein synthesis. And the deficiency symptom is overall chlorosis of the upper leaves first. So we'll see it at the top of the plant before we see it anywhere else. And you just start to see those yellowing of the leaves at the top. Magnesium is immobile in the soil, mobile in the plant. Activates ATP or energy transfer. Component of chlorophyll. Enzyme activation, protein deficiency symptoms include intravenous chlorosis or necrosis, twisting of the leaf edges. So we start to see these wavy edges, and you see those stripes that we start to see too. Calcium is immobile in the soil and immobile in the plant. A lot of things that we've talked about so far are mobile and immobile in different things. One is in the soil and one is in the plant, but this one is immobile in both, which means we're going to need a lot of it, right? So major functions are cell wall structure, cell wall growth and extension, enzyme activation, deficiency symptoms, chlorosis on the young leaves first, and structural integrity. And we also see blossom end rot in tomatoes. Get a lot of calls about what's wrong with my tomatoes. They do just great, and then all of a sudden the end's rotting out of them. It's a calcium deficiency. Iron is immobile in both the plant and the soil. Major functions are the hemiproteins, the iron sulfur proteins, and chloroplast development, which is responsible for photosynthesis. Some deficiencies that we might see: intervenal chlorosis, decreased nodulation, and sometimes bleaching or white on the leaves. Here's a iron deficiency. Zinc, immobile in both. Major functions are cell elongation and growth, activates enzymes, important for eliminating free radicals in the plant. And some of the deficiencies include stunning, rosetting, or intervenal chlorosis or mottling. So here are some zinc examples. Molybdenum is mobile in both, not immobile. It is mobile in both the soil and the plant. So one of those things we won't have to add probably a lot of. It's there for nitrogen fixation, for enzyme activation, and deficiencies include stunning, decreased nodulation, and pale cupped leaves. So here's what we see with a molybdenum deficiency. It is immobile in the plant and the soil. Manganese. Its major functions include chloroplast, internode elongation, and deficiencies include shortened inner nodes and intervenal chlorosis. So shortened inner nodes mean that the leaves are going to be a lot closer together, okay? Copper is immobile in both soil and plant. Its major functions are chlorophyll production, respiration, protein synthesis, and the deficiencies that we might see with a copper is chlorosis and tip necrosis. The tips of the plants are going to start to die off if there's a copper deficiency. Boron is mobile in the soil and immobile on the plant. Major functions include cell wall formation, reproductive tissue formation, and the deficiencies that we might see with boron is atypical or terminal bud necrosis. Before it ever becomes out as a leaf, it's going to die, and then chlorosis of the younger leaves. So we see here a little bit of a boron example of, here's our control, here's the other days without boron. Chlorine is mobile in the soil and immobile in the plant. Its major functions is cell water regulation and photosynthesis, and a deficiency of chlorine is because of chlorosis and toxicity issue for most plants. And we'll also see wilting with chlorine deficiency. So just some take home from this part is the law of the minimum, that when one of these things is missing, all other things probably stop. So we have to have a good balance of our nutrients. We prevent deficiency and yield loss, and we need to prevent toxicity and lodging. Again, we have macronutrients and micronutrients, and those all are needed by a plant. They all play an essential role in some process that the plant has. They're required to complete a life cycle, and nothing else can substitute for them. So if it's an immobile nutrient, the deficiency is in the newer upper leaves first, and if it is a mobile, it is deficiency in the older lower leaves first. Okay, so again, we appreciate you coming today, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact your local county extension office, or you can contact us here at the Pike County Cooperative Extension Office in Murfreesboro, 870-285-2161, about forgot. And if you have any questions, contact us or go to our website at uaex.edu. I hope you learned something, and thank you for joining us.